because we received 657 ballot signatures from citizens under the process of Missouri law that petitioned me to audit a city. And we came here and we thought it was a really good idea that there had been a petition, because we found 42 areas that needed significant improvement when we did the audit. And unfortunately, we gave the city our lowest rating. I delivered the results of that audit on December 10th, 2013 in a very lengthy and detailed public session. And I was pleased to come here to Bolivar and talk about what needed to be done. And we were very concerned. We had some concerns, and I was very straightforward about that. Our objective in doing these audits and doing the follow-up audits is not to get involved in political disputes or issues that go on in the city, but rather simply to look at the business and accounting practices and make sure that they're well done and well run. And that's what we tried to do. And we found a lot of problems. There was no doubt there were some significant problems. When I became auditor, I did something that had not been done before in the state auditor's office, which was establish a follow-up team. When we do our grading system, which is something else I implemented, we give every entity we audit an excellent, good, or fair, or poor under very specifically defined criteria that are on our website that you can see. And if somebody gets a fair or a poor, our two lowest grades, we come back. Usually it's 90 days later, but in an instance here where we found 42 problems, we give them a little more time, so we gave you 6 months. And we want to see major improvement. That's the objective. And it's only about improving the delivery of services to the city of Bolivar. It involves nothing else. That's all we're interested in seeing. So we came back and we did the follow-up audit. It was actually led by Darrell Moore, who was a prosecutor in Greene County for many years. Many of you probably know him. And I wanted just to go over briefly. I won't spend nearly the amount of time in going over the follow-up recommendations I did in the initial audit, but just tell you what the overall, some of our conclusions were when we went through and looked at the audit and follow-up activity. So as you may recall, when we issued our initial audit, our first finding had to be relative to finances. That's always what we look at first in the city. And we found there were significant issues with the financial condition of the city. There were problems with the city using restricted funds to subsidize the park fund, which is not allowable under state law. The water and sewer fund operated at a loss. There was significant problems with paying for the aquatic center. It's a nice center, but the finances were not in good condition. And then the city's unrestricted general fund balance was down to $250,000, which is really only 1 month's worth of activity, which is significantly lower than what we like to see when we do an audit. So our recommendations always flowed from our findings, which is we wanted better monitoring the financial condition of the city, that better handling of restricted funds, some sort of plan for the aquatic center, and to stop doing improper transfers between funds, which are not allowed under state law. We have found in this area that all of our recommendations are in progress. They're not fully implemented. When we look at follow-up, we have fully implemented, which is the best result, which means it's completely done. We had in progress, which means that concrete steps have been taken to assure that these problems will be solved. We have partially implemented, which means the city would have decided not to do some of the stuff and only do some of the stuff we recommend. We don't really like that. And then not implemented is the lowest follow-up score. In the case of the financial condition of the city, it's in progress, which means there's been a commitment made to resolve all the issues that we identified in the first audit, and they've at least made significant progress in some areas. There's a more detailed reviewing of revenue going on. The subsidizing of restricted funds from the general fund is being eliminated. And we're also pleased that the general fund cash balance has now doubled to over $500,000. So that's concrete progress. And so we've given that an in-progress grade. And we think that the city is well on its way to resolving its financial problems, even though they are not resolved yet. The aquatic center was finding number 2. We focused on the aquatic center. We found that the board had failed to properly plan financing, construction, excessive costs, and even the way it was run by the YMCA. We found some issues with that when we first did our audit. And our recommendation there was there had to be much better planning for future projects, and certainly something had to be done about the current financial condition of the aquatic center. As you know, the city, and this I think had actually happened right before I got there 6 months ago, had decided only to operate part of the year. The city is operating itself instead of having the YMCA operated. And we think those are improvements, and we see that condition improving over time as well. So that is in progress. It's not fully implemented, but there has been significant progress in that area as well. Finding number 3 was additional findings relative to the use of restricted funds. This is a very common issue. I talked about this when I was here. the first time around. Very often it's a rob Peter to pay Paul situation. One fund doesn't have enough money, the other does, and they take it from one fund and move it to the other. That's not allowed. It depends on the terms by which the restricted fund was formed, but usually that's not permitted, and we did find that was going on here. We found that there was a significant amount of money also being transferred from restricted funds to the general fund just to cover administrative costs. And some of the funds were actually operating with negative balances, which is obviously on its face very problematic. There were also problems with tracking and recording equitable sharing funds, law enforcement training. We talked a little bit about the law enforcement training funds, which were not being adequately tracked as well. So our recommendation was very simple: use restricted funds as intended and in accordance with law, ensure adequate monies exist before making disbursements, establish separate accounting for law enforcement training, equitable sharing funds. We think that concrete steps, again, have been made toward all those areas. We believe the city is committed to improving that situation, and our auditors were basically happy with what they saw in terms of at least progress in that area. The fourth finding was disbursements. There were 6 recommendations in that area. We found significant problems with the solicitation of bids for contracts. We view competitive bidding as critically important when doing with city services and goods. There were some problems with that. In fact, the city code was being violated in that respect. That professional services were being obtained without a competitive selection process. Sometimes the evaluation process for selecting vendors for the city was not adequate. And we found that there were some problems with state law also for engineering services contracts. The city also paid in advance for weapons that it had not received even 3 years later. And we generally frown upon advance payments for goods because the exact problem that happened here is sometimes they don't deliver the goods. And that's what happened here. The city clerk, there were some issues with depositing payroll taxes and paying bills. There were some unnecessary late fees being incurred for late payment of bills, which there's just no reason, that's just money down the drain. And there were also some problems with forms being filed with the federal government for miscellaneous independent contractors that the city had contracted with. Our recommendations, as I said, always flow from our findings. There had to be better solicitation of bids and proposals, following city policy and state law for that matter. Consider expanding the city's purchasing and bidding policies to address professional services, not just goods. We like competition for services as well as goods, and to document better the selection process. Again, we see that the city has not fully implemented what we wanted there, but we have seen significant progress, and we're optimistic that the city will be handling its contracting procedures better. We obviously don't want to see paying for goods in advance. Apparently, the weapons looks to be a lost cause, so that's unfortunately something that you're probably not going to get. That was money down the drain. You could sue, but I kind of agree with the city when they say that the cost of litigation is higher and lawyer probably more than the value of the weapons. So that just has to be a lesson. It didn't work, and they're not going to come, and that's the end of that. We had some findings about employee leave records and procedures. There was leave payouts that were not appropriate. Some city employees that accumulated more paid time off than authorized by city policy or by their employment contracts. We wanted to make sure that leave policies were documented and approved. Our accountants looked very carefully at the leave activity that occurred since we were here last time in December, and everything met with state law and all complied, and it looks like that is now fully implemented, and that recommendation is complete. We wanted to make sure leave accumulations and compensation were also in accordance with city policy, and it looks like that's moved, the city's moved a long way toward implementing that as well. We had significant problems when I was here 6 months ago with the accounting records and procedures of the city. There was blatant inaccuracies in the accounting records. Bank reconciliations were not done in a timely manner, and sometimes the bank statement and the cash accounts did not even agree with each other, which is sort of accounting 101. And there were some transfers between funds that were not approved by the board, which is also not in accordance with state law. We believe now, having looked at the reconciliations and the accounting records, there's been a significant improvement in that area. Still a little ways to go. You'll see when you read the audit report. Still a little ways to go, but I do see a real commitment on the part of the city to improve the accounting practices and procedures over what we saw when I was here 6 months ago. And the transfers between funds now all get board approval. Everything that's occurred since I was here has gotten the proper board approval, so that one is fully implemented. We also had some issues with controls and oversight. There were 4 recommendations. The board had not segregated duties or performed an inadequate review of city clerk's work. There was problems with cash receipts. Passwords weren't kept confidential. They were not changed on a periodic basis, which is something we like to see. And there were also a lot of people able to change data in the computer system, so there was a serious computer security issue that we noted when we were here the first time. So we recommend all those be fixed, and all of those have been fully implemented. The password procedures, the process for getting access to computers. All those activities have occurred, and we're very happy about that because those are important. Security, as you know, IT security is like a problem at the local level, at the county level, at the state level, and of course at the international level and national level. And we think that the city is taking important steps to improve that situation. We looked at payroll and other matters. There were some very serious issues with taxation and reporting retirement plan withholdings. There were some problems with not reporting commuting expenses to the IRS, which could really get the city in some trouble, so we wanted to see that fixed quickly. And there were some problems in documents. Some people are employees of the city, which has a whole set of rights that go with it, and others are independent contractors. And when we look at records of people who are working with the city, we want to understand why some people are classified as employees and independent contractors, because there are very big differences in the law, and you can't force somebody to be an independent contractor when they're really operating 100% as an employee. So we wanted to make sure that was done. We saw some problems with payments without independent review. Supervisors didn't always sign timesheets or document the approval of the time that workers were spending on various projects in the city. And the good news is that all 4 of our recommendations have been fully implemented. We want to make sure that IRS regulations are followed regarding taxing and reporting of compensation. Auditors looked at that. Everything's in compliance now. We wanted to make sure that employees were properly classified as either employees or independent contractors. Our auditors took a good look at that, and that's all fully compliant. And we wanted to ensure that supervisors signed timesheets. And we did the sampling. We don't look at everything, but the sampling indicated that that's also now being done. So I think the citizens who put this petition together can be confident that in that area the city has made significant improvements. Relative to the mileage, that process is still in place. They're still trying to get the right procedures in place, but we're confident also that issues regarding mileage, commuting, and reporting to the IRS will be resolved shortly. We also had a series of findings relative to city procedures and written agreements. There was not an adequate procedure for business licenses and permits. They weren't following the actual contracts that were addressed. And some contracts and arrangements with people doing business in the city weren't even in writing, which of course is very important to have all those in writing. We recommended that business licenses be pre-numbered, that they be reconciled to the fees that are received, that there are collection procedures for unpaid business licenses, and that all agreements were in writing and monitored periodically for full compliance. Those are all in progress. Again, there was not enough time in the past to make sure all of that was done, but based on our review of what's been done since we were here last time, there does appear to be a commitment to improve those procedures, and we did see significant improvements in those areas. With respect to another problem we had was the financial statements. The city was required to publish its financial statements and submit annual financial reports to my office. That was not happening, we can tell you that. And that's been fully implemented. We've got the reporting information that we're looking for, so that's done. There were some significant issues with utility systems in the city. The city increased sewer rates without preparing a statement of costs, and it hadn't reviewed its water rates in over 6 years. The city had not compared adjustments posted to approval forms, didn't reconcile consumer utility deposits to the amounts reported to the accounting records. You always have to reconcile those two. Those are all in progress, and actually the adjustments that have been made have been, I think, completely in accordance with state law and city policy. So we think that's almost completely implemented at this point. We had significant problems with inventory, property control, and property records. Property records didn't include all necessary information. There was very little monitoring of fuel and vehicle use, which is an area frequently that we see around the state where there's fraud. People stealing gas. It's very, very common, especially with the high price of gas. We didn't have any evidence of that, but we didn't see where adequate records to prove that. And the police department didn't have full control of the seized property, although it was a relatively small amount. Our recommendations were to maintain adequate property records, monitor for vehicle and fuel use, ensure the police department has a single seized property inventory list, and perform a physical inventory and dispose of outdated or older items as proper and get some revenue for the city there. All of those recommendations are in progress and well on their way to full implementation. We want to keep a close eye and make sure they are fully implemented, but we are optimistic that those issues will be completely resolved. And then we also had some problems with the Sunshine Law. This is another very common issue. Sunshine Law is complicated in Missouri, but one of the most important parts about me being a public official is to make sure government is as open and transparent as possible. Citizens asked for this petition because they were concerned that things were going on that they didn't know about. When we looked at it, it turned out to be true in some cases, and we wanted to make sure that proper studies were discussed in closed meetings. If meetings were closed, you all as citizens would get to know why they were closed, and we feel that was fully implemented. Our review of the meetings that have occurred since then are all in accordance with state law and in accordance with the Sunshine Law. So I'm here to say that, number one, I want to thank the citizens of Bolivar for taking the time to get a petition. My office does not have jurisdiction over cities unless there's a petition, so we can't come in on our own. Sometimes we get a petition, and quite frankly, there's nothing wrong, and maybe somebody doesn't like somebody, and there's no real reason to do audit. There were definitely serious reasons to do an audit. The audit was never a pleasant process. No one likes it. It's unpleasant to the people who are involved in the city, who are working very hard, but we feel this was definitely needed. But we also think that for those of you who wanted this petition, read the follow-up carefully. I think you will see that the people are committed to resolving these problems. Many of them have already been fully implemented. Most of them are well on their way to be implemented. And we did not have a single one of our 42 findings where we had to say either not implemented or only partially implemented, meaning the city had decided not to do what we said. And that's unusual, because usually we find some things they say, we're just not going to do that. And that didn't happen here. They're committed to solving every problem. Most of them are either solved or well on their way to being solved. And I think you all who did the petition should be happy you did it. But I think sometimes you got to let, so there's a lot of tension that builds up, and I think it's time to kind of dissipate that now. Work with your city, make sure that they fully implement everything that's in our audit follow-up report. We're confident that they will. Keep a good eye on them. But I think you can be confident that they took your effort seriously and they tried to fix all the problems that you all just identified. So thank you very much.